All right. Thank you for that introduction. So yes, this is the first of a three-part series spread out across the calls of the researcher-facing track and the emerging centers track later this month. So be sure to check those out with sort of different flavors of similar discussion. I'm Lauren Michael. For those who don't know me, I co-coordinate the People Network and helped found the People Network and CaRC partially as an outcome of the ACIRF project that put together the leading practices of facilitation, where myself and for some time also Bob Freeman served as sort of lead ACIRFs, where the ACIRF project was to create a network of research computing facilitators when that term was newer, having originated at the University of Wisconsin, but to really recognize that there is, and certainly was at that time, a tremendous need for human support to help researchers not just use computing resources, but really navigate which computing and data resources are most relevant to them. And as many of you know, there's been an expansion of the recognition of cyber infrastructure as going beyond computing to include data and software since then. But I can give you an introduction to what we put together, which did start around 5 years ago, I think. Deb was right there. But we completed some of the last updates and additions to the leading practices in 2018, which is why you'll see at the bottom of these pages a 2018 sort of copyright date. So what we did, and again, at this time in the scope of more of a computing focus, but still recognizing that many of us in the ACIRF project did a lot of what you would consider to be data facilitation and other areas of CI network facilitation alongside what we did with computing. We tried to capture aspects of facilitation in sort of two primary ways. First, there's this introduction and main ideas that talks about what facilitation means philosophically and in the context of research cyber infrastructure, computing and data resources in support of research. And there's a point where we talk about really some significant principles that I think span beyond computing, certainly, that talk about things like promoting awareness of resources, doing so with a certain sense of
Oh no, I think we lost Lauren. Okay, let's wait a minute for her to come back because I don't think the rest of this will make sense without the intro.
hello?
Yay! Hello.
Am I the only one that went away? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I think Lauren,
Okay,
you probably want to turn your video off because it is pretty
Okay.
choppy.
I am sorry about that. So there's my video off. I'll try sharing screen again. I haven't had issues with my local network in many months, so hopefully that was like a rare non-repeating problem. But here should be the same share. And can somebody let me know where you last heard me talking, what I was saying?
So it was about awareness, making folks aware.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like you heard me up until the moment that I knew I was gone. So, so yeah, we captured, I think, some of these general principles and philosophies of facilitation that really do, I think, span the full spectrum of cyber infrastructure, computing and data and software and networking, services and capabilities for research. So these include things like promoting awareness of resources with some agnosticism, meaning not just selling researchers on technologies that you know or prefer, but making sure that they're aware of a variety of them, including those that are not necessarily on your campus if you're a facilitator working in a campus context, and otherwise pointing researchers to resources outside of the ones your organization operates. Teaching researchers how to use available ACI resources, not just through documentation and proactive engagement, but always in a sort of teach to fish approach, meaning, with the expectation that the user is able to learn and reproduce solutions that you present to them. So like in computing, this was exemplified in our principle that we didn't really go and change people's submit files for them, but rather communicated to them what changes they might need to make and why, so that they could reproduce that and not sort of become dependent on us being involved in their actual use and execution of their use of advanced cyber infrastructure. And it also included sort of proactive engagement and consulting to provide personalized guidance, very personalized guidance. And like many of us who do facilitation at UW-Madison, this is sort of, I think, our flagship principle. We meet with everybody who requests an account on our computing resources. We understand not just their computational goals and certainly not just their short-term goals, but how their current project fits into the scope of their research questions in general, what computing background they have, so that we can communicate a kind of ROI, a personalized ROI of if you put in this much effort or learning and work with us to use these resources, you can expect to get this much out. So a number of those are captured here. There are other things here. We also clarified like what facilitation isn't, that there at that time were a number of other roles or even just responsibilities amongst those that one person might have, that even though they may be important to supporting use of advanced cyber infrastructure, are not necessarily facilitation because they're typically something else. And then the second part of the leading practices, and really sort of the bulk of the content, tends to be a little bit more specific to research computing and I think data resources associated with research computing resources, but it's in these different activities of facilitation. So they're the principles of facilitation, then the activities. So you can get to those from here. They're sort of like chapters, and they have small descriptions here, but you can also get to them from the homepage under major activities of facilitation. And before I jump into that, just to mention that we've got some key definitions here, an appendix, ways to contribute, because all of this is provided, all of the sort of backend functionality and content is provided through GitHub with Markdown as the sort of text framework. But under major activities, you can get to each of these sort of chapters. So those include like getting started as a new facilitator, whether you're the first one on your campus or in your organization, or you're coming on where there are other facilitators around you, how to perform outreach, so that's promoting awareness, how to engage with researchers, meeting with them and providing that consulting, and a number of other activities that, based upon the principles and philosophies of facilitation, are critical to actually executing it. And that includes, for example, facilitating researcher connections, which is why in proactive engagement, it's important to understand not just researchers' computing problem, but how it fits into their research goals in general, because you might be able to connect that researcher with others who are doing some of the same work and depend on the same technologies, but also, others maybe slightly outside of that researcher's purview that might lead to productive collaborations. So that's kind of the overview, and I probably should have paused somewhere around when I got interrupted anyway, and asked if there are other questions about the leading practices as they were first put together and currently sit.
We did have a question about if these are available as like a PDF or any sort of files.
No, I don't think we ever took a snapshot of these and produced a DOI, though we considered it at some point. We were sort of torn between the benefits of that versus what we perceived as an obligation to the community for this to be a dynamic resource. And that's reflected in the fact that we've got the sort of how to contribute section. So ideas welcome there in terms of whether and how any community of people thinks a set of leading practices should be carried forward. And I actually was sort of curious, you said, Deb, earlier, like we think that the leading practices of facilitation should be evolved. Can you elaborate on what you mean by we?
Well, particularly in the data track, there's a lot of folks from library side who aren't necessarily affiliated with the HPC centers, which is generally where the word facilitation is used. And like kind of how I view it is computing is kind of only part of a whole research workflow at this point. And we're trying to expand it to include all of a research workflow. Like traditionally, HPC has been for simulations, which generate their own data. But now people are using HPC to compute on data that is generated in the lab. So there's a lot more to it than just what the HPC center runs at this point. So that's kind of what we're thinking of updating this with.
Got it. Yeah, so I've got a couple of thoughts there, and then can maybe walk you through one of the chapters. My first thought is, I sort of wonder if this, in the course of this month, we can discuss how much specificity might still be advantageous to keep in terms of facilitation that's specific to use of research computing resources versus resources for various aspects of like data curation, data management, data storage, archiving, that kind of thing. Or, whether and how it makes sense to combine those without maybe losing some of that specificity.
Yep, that's the idea.
Yeah.
So, real quick though, Amy Nernberger has a bit to present. Yeah, she has to leave at 1:30, so let's get to her piece.
Yeah.
She's going to describe kind of some similar resources on the library side, and maybe we can like mush them together somehow. All right, so over to Amy. Oh, did she drop? Oh no.
Oh no.
Well, this
for
is going
technology.
swimmingly.
Apologies about that.
Yay. I guess this is a cursed Zoom meeting today.
Okay, it looks like the screen sharing is disabled. So, but I did put a link to my slides in the doc. If someone who can screen share can screen share those, that would be delightful.
There you go. I made you a co-host.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, can you see my slides?
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I really appreciate the opportunity of really trying to put together, as you had said, some of these pieces, some from the library side of things, some from the more traditional compute and data side of things together. So today, I just want to talk a little bit about my experience facilitating research data consultations coming from a fairly strong library side of things. My name is Amy Nernberger. I'm at MIT. I'm the program head for data management services there, which sits within the program, which sits within the libraries. And then I'm also interim department head for data and specialized services. So you can tell I do all of the data things. So getting into this idea of facilitating research data consultations, one of the things I really wanted to address today was how this intersects with what's known in the library world within information professionals as the reference interview, and how we use these two things to inform each other in this space. The first thing in this is that we're really thinking about, when we think about consultations, it's truly all about trust. They're all about creating that sphere of trust between you and the party that you're consulting with. It's trust that you're going to have that information that the user needs. It's trust that you're not going to be wasting their time. Trust that you aren't going to judge them, that you're not going to judge their challenges or whatever their need is for help. It's oftentimes we find when people are coming to us, it is to an extent from a place of vulnerability, because they have to admit that they don't know something in order to seek our help. And this is very difficult, especially in academics situations, for some people to just kind of own up to. So we find it very important to acknowledge that this is the space that we are thinking about building trust in this, and not to be judging people on gaps in their knowledge. I should have put this in the XKCD cartoon. I love this about Coke, Diet Coke and Mentos. And while the phenomenon of Diet Coke and Mentos may seem super widespread, it could be something that is not known to this person, and you have that opportunity to share with that one person today that idea of Diet Coke as Mentos, and it's an exciting thing. So one of the tools that information professionals are trained on and commonly used in these situations is known as the reference interview. And the basis of the reference interview is it's really all about interactions between humans and information. And it's just as useful for a data consultation as it is for any other reference consultation type. It really focuses on a user-centered approach and takes into account that it can be used to address all different sorts of experience levels. And it also works across any communication type, which has been really fortunate in the past little bit as we've adapted our communications to in-person, virtual, or email. And to be honest, we have a large campus footprint here, so we often did find that we were offering virtual consultations even before the pandemic enforced this mode of communication on us, just because it can be a 30-minute walk to the office of who you're talking with. But ultimately, the idea, again, behind the reference interview is to use these techniques to build trust between you and the person that you're offering consultation with. So what are some of the shared goals that we look at between data consultations and reference interviews? One of the big ones is understanding what's going on for the user. What is their, not just the problem that they think they're bringing to you, but what is their fuller context? What is the larger situation that they believe they're operating in, what they're seeing in the space around them, that they're operating with them, and understanding what those different systems are that they're interacting with, what the different pressures are that they're feeling. One of the other goals that we have is really connecting users to the resources that are needed. And I think Lauren really brought this up quite a bit as well, is once you understand what's going on for the user, it's being able to create the connection between what they need and what exists. Again, whether that exists at your institution or somewhere else in the research ecosystem, creating the relationships, the technical and social connections that they need in order to access these systems. And this is something that within the libraries and research data world that we've built a very strong personal network between a lot of the people who practice in this area so that we can call on each other for questions around resources and figure some of these things out when resources aren't necessarily available at our own institutions. And then the final thing within this is establishing a continuing relationship. If someone is engaged in research that are going to be using these resources, it's not probably going to be a one-time question. Your resources are going to change, their needs are going to change, and you want to make sure that you've built a relationship that continues, that has a future to it, which is why it really comes back to that idea of trust again, and that the thought that they can come back to you to ask the next question and the next question. If you're working with a PI, that they can send their grad students to you so that there can be this continuing build of expertise and experience across your institution and within your localized network as well. So some of the characteristics that are shared between data consultations and reference interviews, we already talked about that human-to-human interaction about information. This isn't something that's a mediated service. This is something that happens in a conversational setting to an extent, whether that conversation is happening face-to-face, is video mediated, or is happening in an email or perhaps even in a text exchange. It is a person-to-person conversation. And it's also about creating that shared space of respect and safety, which means that when you're approaching this consultation space, it is important to be approachable so that people don't have to be scared to come and to ask you that question. Oftentimes, we find people have built up a barrier of expectation, of stereotype threats, of senses of being having judgments about themselves because they have to ask for help, and being able to counter those in a way that's empathetic is very important. I don't know how many other people have had the experience of having people come and cry over their research project, but certainly that is not abnormal, and empathy is definitely useful in those situations as well. And ultimately, depending on the research and depending on the problems that are presented there, that sense of confidentiality. So what does this look like overall? Well, we covered approachable, right? It's also, I find, immensely interesting. Almost any project can be interesting. The project is interesting. The problem is interesting. And if it isn't directly interesting, fake that interest until you find something that is interesting about it that you can become engaged with. Engage with those active listening techniques that you can learn in terms of being able to listen to the questions that are being expressed, listen to the things that aren't being directly expressed as well, and being able to tease those out. When you're asking questions, they're open-ended questions. They're not delivering an answer or presuming a direction necessarily. And as was indicated earlier, they're also neutral questions. They're not presuming a specific research direction, research methodology, or tool solution that will fit into that slot. Other parts of what these activities look like is in answering this question, but also searching for answers, searching for solutions when it's not immediately obvious, when it's not at your fingertips, to find something that's going to work for this unique and particular research situation. And then finally, follow up. That's part of maintaining and building that continuing relationship, is checking in to make sure that the resources that you have been able to connect the user to have been useful to them, did work out the way that you had hoped. They were able to get access to them. The mechanics worked the way they were supposed to in their workflows. And so how does this sound, right? When you're in that, what are some of the questions that you might ask, right? To get a sense of the person's context and place in this space. What is their role in the project? Trying to get a sense about what their problem space is. What is this data? How much data you have? What is the specific role of data within the research? Are there specific requirements or conditions around your data? What are the research outputs that you are creating? Who do you expect to share these outputs with? Who do you expect to share that data with? But ultimately, all of these come down to center around what is it that user truly wants or needs? Why are they coming to you in this space? What else do we have on the plate for success within a research data or a consultation or a reference interview? There's that approach for friendliness. A sense of calm is almost always necessary. No one wants to be panicked out by the, oh my gosh, you didn't do this. Why did you not do this? I've rarely found that helpful. To eschew jargon when you're talking with people, not to use the acronyms, not to use the abbreviations, not to use the words that everyone knows, because maybe this person doesn't, which is why they're coming to you for assistance. To have an idea in mind of where this conversation is likely to go, that you have questions that you need to find the answers to, so you're directing the conversation to a certain extent. And finally, to have that patience, that persistence to sit through teasing out what those needs are, what the potential solutions might be, and applying a certain amount of imagination, creativity, and a sense of a flexible mindset in that space as well, because research truly is unique in many of its aspects, and it's working out what those are. Where we have many general resources that we might apply to it, how it's going to apply to this specific situation is very important. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. I do want to say that much of the information in this set of slides was shared with me by Kaylin Boyd previously, and you can see her credit on the next slides. But if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take one before I have to run off to my next meeting. All right then. Well, thank you very much again for this opportunity. And I'm so sorry that I have to do a present and run, but links to the slides are in the document and my email is in there as well. So if anyone has any questions for me or would like to follow up, I would be happy to do that. I also know that there are any number of other information professionals and library trained people on this call, so I'm sure they can fill in any gaps too. Thank you again very much.
Cool. All right. Yes, thank you, Amy, for that, even though she left already. Oh, well. But like one thing we noticed when we were discussing this 3-part session is a lot of that stuff is what is in the facilitation guide. Is just like the perspective of the interviewer is just a bit different. And so kind of what we're thinking is maybe adding other perspectives in there. And to that point, I wanted to present a little bit on what my team has done. We've kind of created a new type of position in addition to facilitation. We've called it a liaison. So let me share my screen. Well, first, some links in the chat. I'm putting the link to the paper and a link to the YouTube. If you can't access that paper, let me know. I haven't gotten it into our free archive yet. I've dropped the ball on that, but I can give it to you for free. All right. So yeah, our team of research liaisons, it's going to sound similar, sort of, but it does feel different to me. And just, I wanted to point out this great tenet from the Cyber Ambassador curriculum. A successful solution solves the problem and maintains the relationship. That I think a lot of people forget about that second half. And that's kind of what our team was formed around, is maintaining relationships. And so the goal of our program was to do a pilot with some departments and mainly just provide better services and help researchers navigate IT better. And then also form relationships with other service providers to that point of being solution agnostic. You want to point them at the right thing. And so some of our duties were mostly pointing researchers at the needed teams for their services, and also providing recommendations. But the big difference is that we were not actually running any of those services that they consumed down the line. Like our service was us. And because of that, we had time to also engage a lot internally. So our department is called HITS. So that's what this HITS facing stuff is. This was all internal. We had time to talk to people like the storage and the networking teams to build those relationships as well, to help fill those service gaps we saw when we were talking with researchers. So a lot of this is just relationship building, but not just with researchers, with everybody else too. And like the thing that we maintain is those relationships, which has been a huge benefit for us. Like our team exists along with our facilitation team. You need both. So yes, relationship building. And to that point, during our pilot period of our program, we actually engaged all the teams in our department to help people. And there were some services that we actually helped create during our program. We made a better incremental program for increasing storage. We got a high-speed research network. We got a managed load for instrument devices. We got unique device work group going to help get devices on the network and supported. And here's just a slew of other service providers that we ended up forming relationships as well. It wasn't just internal to our department. It was the libraries, it was facilities. We worked with the Division of Public Safety and Security at one point, which is the police on campus. That was an interesting one. So we had resounding success with our program, trying to help with all these goals. And we realized that the essential part of all our team members is a lot like what Amy was talking about earlier. You have to be curious, you have to be empathetic, patient, you have to have strong professional skills, not so much the technical skills. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity. That's just kind of the nature of research. And especially important is this idea of system thinking, including organizational awareness. That's the concept of like the big picture, being able to talk with a researcher about their immediate issue and kind of read between the lines to see that there's a bigger picture, and then start pulling on those threads to get that bigger picture. And often what we find is when we get that bigger picture, they need like some HPC, some just regular storage, some networking, some not advanced compute, I guess, like endpoint computing. There's a whole bunch of stuff now that researchers need help with in the tech sphere. And that's just something our team is trying to capture for other institutions to also start helping with this. And so, like I said earlier, this liaison team is an addition to the facilitation team. They're complementary, and the liaisons are the service. They don't have any stuff that we support. And our staff is dedicated to our team. There's no split efforts. So it's not like you're 50% doing HPC facilitation and 50% doing liaisons. Like, I don't think it's possible to form all these relationships and maintain them if you're splitting your effort. So these people need to kind of be very focused on just forming relationships with all the other service providers as well as researchers. Oh, and this slide, I wanted to acknowledge the first bullet in particular. You want to be aware of what's going on beyond you. Don't get into the mindset of like, once you turf a ticket to another team, it's not your problem anymore. It's absolutely still your problem. So that's a bit about our program. So at this point, we just wanted to open up the floor and see if anybody has any thoughts about what we need to include in this next round. If there's anything we're missing, if it's just the contextual points, just kind of open floor.
And I've got some questions and thoughts, but I want to give other people the opportunity to ask first.
Maybe I can put a question out there. So Deb, I guess thinking about that, it's not my problem, it's some other team's idea. How do we really ensure that the communication, is effective and everybody gets informed about all the changes that are happening and all the different groups that are interested in doing this kind of work? I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems that I face at my institution, is just keeping my finger or thumb on the pulse of what's all going on around and trying to make sure that I do get all the right communications.
So the way we do that is we make relationships with like individual folks on teams. We kind of just keep each other up to date. So like we have a strong partnership with our storage team, and like we actually have a hand in their strategy. But then for external groups that don't have report up to the same people, like the library is just, we make an effort to check in every quarter. And our library in particular, we're trying to figure out how to collaborate more directly in researcher engagements. It's just a little hard when we're all still virtual. And that's why I think it's hard to do what we call liaison work when you have other stuff to take care of. Like the operational work, even though we don't support stuff, we still have like a whole ton of operational work. And that keeps us from doing these more strategic things. And that would just be so much worse if we did have like actual hardware to take care of. Claire?
Deb, we actually have a program very similar to what you described, but it's part of our research facilitation. We kind of started out with not really having our own services, and my budget was really all people. And we have since added a cluster, and we have added some other stuff, but we have strong partnerships with those people who do provide other RCD services and support. And I think it just forced us to create those strong partnerships with those other folks and really flesh out the fact that RCD comes from all kinds of different places at the institution. And so we didn't start specialized, for example, for those programs that start in an HPC center.
Yeah, and my comment is kind of on the same lines, because you mentioned, Deb, that the liaisons are sort of like a layer of facilitation. And I think that's kind of rooted in the origin of the term in the cyber infrastructure context, right, at Wisconsin and ACI Ref. a lot of what's in the leading practices of facilitation and the parts that are very generalizable across different types of CI resources are things that you mentioned, like promoting awareness of various resources, liaising with providers of various resources, liaising researchers to connect them with those resources or with each other. So I think it will be important, moving forward as the CARC People Network, right? This community that uses the term facilitators and facilitation to be kind of clear. And I know it differs on an institutional context. So like Claire described hers, at UW, we've got several different providers of research cyber infrastructure who all have teams of facilitators that do this liaison work and liaise with each other. But I don't think that what we consider to be facilitation or what's in leading practices is maybe some of what you're referring to that your facilitators do. Like our facilitators, the way we think of the term, are not doing any systems administration. We don't run computing work for people. And these are things that are reflected in the leading practices too, like the like what facilitation is not part. So I was wondering if you could explain for your campus's context and use of the term liaison versus facilitator, what your facilitators are doing. Because I think a lot of that liaising is stuff that our facilitators are able to do, but maybe it's because we're not doing other things that what your facilitators, do is called facilitation on your campus.
Yeah, so what our facilitators, like our specific HPC team, do, it is kind of weird. So we have a central HPC unit, but then all the schools and colleges also have their own local IT. So it's kind of a combined staff from the HPC center and staff from the local IT kind of collaborate to provide support. So our unit IT who support the HPC center do things like answer tickets when people have issues with their SLIM jobs. They help with installations. They do the documentation. They do the HPC specific training. They don't do any systems work either. I guess it's just enough of it that doing facilitation and the liaising part is just too much for one team at our institution.
I see. So I think maybe that might be a difference of sort of implementation, philosophy, opinion across different institutions that's maybe worth fleshing out. Because, for example, like we see the fact that facilitators are the human face to the research computing organization. And we are also sort of the research computing facilitators across campus. Like we meet with anybody even about using resources that are not ours, of course. But we see the fact that we're the ones that have the relationship with the researchers as really integrally important to doing the liaising and the ongoing support, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That we do either of those things less well. And that similarly, like people who are less on a day-to-day basis in tune with the user experience, like people who do lots of systems administration, et cetera, are in a more difficult position of being able to write documentation that's approachable to users and those sorts of things. But that, yeah, in our case, we see if we had people doing the liaising part and like the initial engagements, and those were different people than the people who do trainings and documentation, that we would lose some continuity of the relationship. So it's really interesting to hear these differences of perspectives. And I'm not new to them because as the term facilitator gained popularity and whatnot, there have been a number of these conversations.
I would agree with Lauren. I'm curious, Deb, about kind of the funding model to be able to separate the two. We really push them, both what you consider facilitation and liaising. We push them together because we want a one-stop shop for our researchers. faculty really like to glom onto a person or to a particular email or a particular site or office or whatever. And they get very confused when they have to find things from 12 different places and they get bounced around by those other people. That's how kind of we originated, is that we wanted somebody to be the pointer out to all of these disparate services. So I'm kind of curious about the leadership support and the funding model that you have to be able to support two separate programs, the facilitation and liaison.
Well, so some context. I work for the Academic Medical Center of the University of Michigan, which is a financially separate entity from the University of Michigan. So it's got a hospital attached to it. So we've got hospital money coming in as well as grant funding. So we've got more money to work with. I will grant that. But so we're in HITS. It stands for Health Information and Technology Services. We're the IT for the Academic Medical Center. And we have a whole division called Academic IT, which is different teams providing support to research and education missions. So we have a number of teams. We have like a device team that helps with like instrument computers. We have our computing team, which is the one that supports the HPC team. We've got a programming team. We've got an applications team. We've got a data integrations team. And so like if you're thinking of vendors, our team's more like the salesperson sort of, or like a sales engineer who is like the first line that people come to. We're the ones who really flesh out like what services they need. We just talk to them about all the context and then just point people at all the various teams that can meet their specific needs. And they'll still form relationships with those other teams as well. But it's like they know they can always come back to our team when they're starting something new, for example, or need something new. So we're kind of the signposters in that regard.
So given what people heard today and Deb's statement at the beginning that there's interest in kind of redefining practices of facilitation, where, what are next steps? What would be, what would be next? We've got other discussions this month.
This is Jane. Oops. Sorry, we're having some. Show me your line. Okay, good. This is Jane Combs from UC Cincinnati, and the emerging centers. We're going to talk about this too, and kind of we're watching what's happening here, and then in the research facilitation. But I think particularly for emerging centers and for smaller institutions, and I mean even I'm in a large institution, but we're just kind of starting this. It's really interesting to know how we can use the librarians as maybe the triage, and we kind of do that here at UC with our library research informationists, but how can we use people that exist already and positions to augment what maybe our one or two people that are doing all of it can help. So I think that's having that really be really clear. And then the other thing that is who should you hire first, and kind of in that discussion, is this research facilitator or liaison, or is it a combination of both, kind of like what you guys do, Lauren, and what Claire's doing. So I think just really kind of being clearer about how those work together and how what that roadmap is to developing. And we'd all love to have, 10 liaisons and research facilitators, but I think that's really for large, but for those of us that want to get to be much larger, then that's a good roadmap to have.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Jane, and this was part of
And
what
we
I
don't
was
want duplication of effort.
right. And this is part of what I was thinking. Liaising, I think, is a critical component of facilitation. And to the extent that Deb's organization has the resources to dedicate people just to the liaising component, I think is great. But you're right that in some cases, like I mentioned, we feel it's really critical that our facilitators are doing the liaising. And I think there's generally agreement that it is part of facilitation. That was part of what I was trying to pull out from Deb, like that it's a layer of facilitation that they've just pulled out and had sort of a dedicated set of people doing. The leading practices and the way that the reason we organized it and talk about facilitation more than we talk about facilitators is because we know that various combinations of activities, including things like systems administration, writing software, running computational work, are done by the person who might spend part of their time doing facilitating and therefore part of their time doing liaising. And so I think if there's, interest in expanding, improving, further developing some general practices that are agreed upon by the community, it will be good to, I think, and I'm biased, of course, because this is the way we did it, but to promote what facilitation is, what what the practices are, more than like what a facilitator is, or who should be doing what work, or if you should have separate teams of dedicated people, because it's going to be different, like you say, across various campuses with people having different combinations. And that's part of why the facings in CARC are the way they are, right? They're not meant to be mutually exclusive. And this is why we say that the way that these tracks organize is kind of like an ongoing conference, where one person at a conference might go to multiple tracks, might have researcher facing duties and systems facing duties and whatnot.
Cool. And is there anyone who could give us a sneak preview of the researcher facing agenda for this? I believe that's the next one.
And I'm scrambling to pull up what Bob promoted for that.
Yep.
But since I shared screen, my laptop is like not showing me my typical menu structure. So to get to my browser.
Cool.
So the other place to find this, now that I've got my browser, is the call announcement for October. So I think in the researcher facing track, there will be a little bit more of a dive into the leading practices of facilitation. And maybe sort of a continuation from here to talk about any community interest in further developing those, expanding the scope to more deliberately include data facilitation, since it is admittedly computing heavy.
Cool. Any other questions or thoughts before we go? Nope. All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. See you Thursday, October 14th at the same time, hopefully.